Today, every day, small cap investors visit Agoracom knowing this is the day to discover the world's next great company, to have their dreams come true. That's why I take to the open road, to find them, to tell their stories, to engage them, to bring them to life, because they want to connect with you from your office, your phone, your home, anywhere. Agoracom, find your dream. Welcome to CEO Interviews, a production of Agoracom, in which we take the time to speak with small cap executives about what's going on at their companies. Today's show, a special one because it's a private company, pre-RTO, with intention to be listed on the CSE in the next 2 to 3 months. With us is David Lukacs. He's co-founder and president of KABN Systems North America. Now, what do? They're a fintech company. We're going to really dive into it because it can get kind of complicated. But the description I've come up with is KABN turns the problem of privacy into a profit. On the official note in their description, KABN is a Canadian fintech company that specializes in continuous online identity, verification, identity management, and monetization. I know that's going to be a lot for people to absorb on first description, but trust me, there's a lot there to it, and it's going to be a massive market. David, welcome to the show, my man.
Thanks, George. It's great to be here and talk about KABN.
Well, we're glad to have you because of 2 reasons. One, you're a pre-RTO company. That's exciting because people get to hear about you before the RTO comes out. And we'll talk about that at the end, but you've already made a press release with the company that you're looking at. And 2, you're going into a market that is on the verge of just blowing up. And then it's just going to continue from there, I think, in the next 5 to 10 years. So before we get into I want to make sure that everyone at home really understands what it is that you're doing, or what it is that you're solving, because a lot of companies in the space speak with real technical jargon and lose people. So here's the first question I want to ask you. Is this a problem, the problem of privacy? Is this a problem that people actually have, or is this a problem that they don't even know they have?
That's an interesting question, George. I think it's a bit of both. I think we've taken the internet for granted over the last 20 odd years and really thought about it being anonymous, but really at its heart is we're duplicating the real world. And if I asked you to get on an airplane today and you went to the airport, you'd have to show an ID before you got anywhere. But for most things on the internet, you don't have to show any ID, even when you're using a credit card. So a lot of the rules are changing. There's a lot of new legislation, and we can get to that. And just for common sense, if I'm online and I want to do something, I think people would want to know who I am. And even as far as it goes to taking an exam, which we've seen recently, that there's been problems with people faking who they are when they take an exam.
Yep,
so I think the internet is moving towards, from anonymity towards a known system of people, everybody knowing who they are.
Now, step 2, you're going even deeper than that. It's not strictly just verification of online identity, because we've been, anybody who hasn't been under a rock in the last few years has known what's happened with privacy, private data being used by big companies, and so on and so forth. So, all right, that's part 1, where you want to protect people's identity and be able to actually verify them. But you're going to go further. So, what you can actually turn that into a profit. In layman's terms, we'll dive deeper. How do you go about that? How do you take my privacy, my private data, and turn that into a profit for me and for your company?
Well, there's 2 types of data, George. There's private data and public data. So let's start at the beginning. Most times that someone would have to verify themselves, and we call that KYC, know your client or know your customer. And in financial transactions, we also do anti-money laundering checks. When you do that, for most times that you've ever done it in your life, it's a single process for a single point in time. KABN changes all that. When you verify with KABN, you get a KABN ID, and anywhere you go that takes a KABN ID, you can use that again. So you don't have to give out your private data information each time you sign in.
Yeah, because that makes me nervous every time I go somewhere, putting your name, your credit card, your address, your this, your that, and you're always wary about it unless it's Amazon. Even then you should be wary about it. But when it gets to smaller sites, you start to worry about that for sure.
Oh, for sure. And I think it's important to understand that, the value of your identity drops with more people that have your basic documents. So KABN makes it the process a one and done and creates a reusable identity platform for yourself. But that's on your private side.
Right.
And once we get to your private side, we help you manage both your private and your public ID. And that public ID is all about the things you like, the things you want, the things you do. That information we aggregate with other information and we make pools of data. So it's really not known that it's exactly you, but it relates to you. And then from there, we can find offers and services that want to reach that pool of data that will give them value because they know the underlying person is verified. It's a real person. So we're creating a new value chain that companies are really excited about.
All right. But why now? Is it just because it was in the media a couple of years ago where it really began to take note, and you're trying to create a market, or is there a catalyst that'll, because a lot of people just use their habits, right? To say, well, okay, what David's saying sounds great, but you know what? I go to Amazon, I go to a couple places, I surf social media. I don't know, maybe it's not that big of a deal for me. Do I really want to change my habit? So, and maybe the same for companies, right? They're like, hey, George comes, he sends us his credit card. It's good. The system works. What's the catalyst that's going to change the habits of people and companies from the status quo to, live in a KABN online, identity management?
Well, I think it's already started to change. 2 years ago, we saw the advent of something called GDPR in Europe, or General Data Protection Regulation. And that really changed the way that data is used and stored. It's really the ownership of that data is now by individuals. On January 1st, we saw the CCPA come into play, and that's the California Consumer Protection Act. That dovetails into what they're doing in Europe. The Canadian privacy laws dovetail on what's doing in Europe. So we're seeing that change already happening, and consumers are going to find themselves being asked more and more to prove themselves. So KABN is way ahead of that curve. But, when you think about using a credit card online, I need very little information to use your credit card online.
True.
I need your name on the credit card. I need your number. I need your, CCV number. I need your home address. And then I can shop online. That's a $30 billion a year fraud industry. And if people were identified, that would make it easier to reduce that and reduce the cost of consumers who are laden with all these credit card fees, because the credit card companies aren't absorbing that money. They're passing it along to the consumers.
Yeah, I've always said that they're complicit in it almost. I mean, they're not participating in the crime, but they don't mind having it happen because that justifies their high fee. So let me dovetail right into that then. The credit card and debit card companies, aren't they going to try? Aren't they going to try and maybe tighten that up a little bit and become a real big competitor to you?
Well, I think we're already there. One of the things, if you think about KABN's business model, which is verifying, managing, and monetizing identity. So we've talked about the verification in making sure that once someone is verified with us, they have a transportable or reusable identity. We also talked a little bit about managing that identity, both as a private and a public identity. The third leg of our business is monetization. And I'm really excited to announce that we are approved by Visa, and we will be launching our own banking platform based on the KABN ID, which is really cool. It's called the Pegasus Flight Visa Card and Mobile Banking Platform. It's coming to Canada first, and we're working on other regions in North America. But it's really cool because our cost of acquisition is so much lower, and we can pass a lot of savings on to our users because those that are already verified with KABN have a bank grade ID, which can then be transportable right into our card program. So we're seeing that value proposition where we can save consumers money, we can pass those savings along, and we can give them more value through our own ecosystem.
All right. So great explanation. Still probably tough for a lot of people to wrap their minds about it, but we can definitely see where you're going. So let's walk through a couple of basic examples of how KABN will help. So let's talk about first an individual, me, okay? Walk me through how my habit or actions would be different for you to protect my ID and for me to start profiting from my ID. How do I manage it? Do I log into the back of KABN and there's my profile? Like, explain to people in layman's terms then, how does George or David or Mary act differently online as a result of KABN?
Okay, so I'm going to change up that just a wee bit and say, how does a consumer get their KABN ID? Because I think that kind of will dovetail both, and then I can answer that question.
Okay.
in most cases, George would come to us through a commercial client that needed to verify their constituents. So it's not always a direct to consumer coming to KABN. They would do an ID verification through a financial institution online that uses KABN. They do it for that financial institution for that point in time or that financial service, and then they become a KABN customer. And when they're a KABN customer and they have their KABN ID, that is a no-cost service. They never pay for that service. So it's easy to do. It's very simple. They fill out some information online, provide a piece of government-issued ID, the front and the back, or in the case of a passport, their inside page. We can verify from that little barcode. We can verify that it's a valid ID. We take a live selfie, and in most cases, we ask them to prove their residence using a bank statement or credit card statement or a utility bill, and that gets them bank grade KYC. They're done. We verify that you are you, and we can prove that that identity belongs to you.
So now devil's advocate there for a second. Why would the institution say, hey, KABN, here's George and my million other customers here. I want you to verify them. Wouldn't they be putting up a wall maybe and saying, I don't want to hand over my customers to David and KABN? Maybe they'll take them and start profiting from them in another way.
Well, they need the service either, and our service is faster, better, and cheaper. So we're less costly than probably 99% of everyone out there to do it, because we see a long-term value in the customer, number one. Number two, if George already has a KABN ID and he goes to the financial institution, he just has to sign in. So for the financial institution, they're getting the benefit of the KABN ecosystem. George doesn't have to revalidate. So on a second use basis, when George goes to that institution that uses KABN, he doesn't have to provide all that documentation again. So it's more valuable to them. So it's a faster, better, cheaper approach.
Right. So if I'm a CIBC customer, because I know this happened to me before, I'm a CIBC banking customer, and I want to get a mortgage, and I got to supply all this stuff all over again. I'm like, don't you guys already have it? And they say, no, our mortgage side is different from our banking side. So I got to give them everything all over again. So two things I'm going to ask you. Is that the kind of problem you solve where you make it real easy and friction free? And two, can that be stolen? Because that's the impetus for what you're doing. So can my KABN ID be hijacked or stolen by somebody? Isn't that still a risk even with you guys?
Yeah, well, a couple things. One is we're working with online financial institutions, not traditional. So that's a bit different. So a lot of these smaller organizations and neobanks and wealth management and exchanges, they need this service. So this is a welcome opportunity for them. And it's in terms of stealing your KABN ID, we have significant security. We use Amazon as our back end, so there is a lot of security there. And as we move forward, we use biometrics to allow you to sign in. So unless someone else has your face, it's going to be a problem to sign in and get.
I've always wondered why credit card, debit card companies just didn't do that. All sorts of things, but I guess it goes back to my original statement. They almost don't mind if it's easy for the waiter to kind of take my credit card ID, sell it to somebody, and then have them shopping on Amazon the day after. The insurance will cover it. They get their goods transferred around, and I get the hassle. So I'm glad you guys have that.
Well, George, I was going to mention, if anybody goes to the U.S. from Canada, Canada's had chip cards for many, many years, and the U.S. has recently just started the chip process, but they don't really use a PIN process in the U.S. yet. So it's even if you use a chip, in most cases, they may actually assign a chip as well. And U.S. credit cards themselves, while they have chips, do not use a PIN system. So you think of the network being so behemoth that it's impossible to add new features without huge amounts of time delay and everything else. So it's actually probably less costly to take the hit on the credit cards and charge it back to the consumer than it would be to reinvent the system.
So is it accurate to kind of, in an analogous way, to say KABN almost becomes a passport that allows you to move from financial institution to financial institution, and you don't have to resubmit your documents, your ID, your financial statements, your this, your that, boom. It's done in one shot, basically?
Well, I've heard financial passport. I've heard Nexus. They're all good. I've heard the fact that I'm an individual influencer. That's very true. But think of it in the education process. I mean, our kids are going to spend more and more time online taking educational courses. And when they go to do exams and other things, how do we know that they are who they say they are, right? So it doesn't just follow the financial institution, but government records, voting, medical, educational. There's just so many applications where ultimately your identity is important to you. And the more theft of an identity, credit implications, there's so many different things, but validation and verification of identity is core to our product. But I think what interests people even more is the ability to profit from their identity. They're now making money. And again, one thing I will say, and just add to that, is that you may have recently seen that Google is getting rid of cookies.
No, actually, I didn't see that.
No, so Google is getting rid of cookies in the next couple of years because it doesn't meld with the current privacy legislation. So by Google getting rid of cookies, the whole advertising industry is going to change. And we're looking at that industry as well and saying, how can we create personal advertising engines where advertisers will share their revenue with me because I'm looking at their ads?
Okay, now see, those are the kind of catalysts I'm happy to hear about, because it's difficult to get people to change habits. It's difficult for companies to change habits and institutions. But with the privacy laws coming in, as a result, you have Google phasing out cookies over the next couple of years. They're going to be forced to look for these kind of solutions. They're not going to have a choice, because that's awesome to hear. So I really like that a lot. So let's talk about the business side. So from a conceptual point of view, it's becoming a lot more clear. And for everyone at home, it's not going to be crystal clear because this is all brand new. It's just a brand new way of doing things personally. It's a brand new way for business to be doing things. But I'm sure everyone now at home is getting the gist of what's happening here. Let's talk about the business side. I'm assuming that for KABN to be successful, you're going to have millions of users, millions of Georges, millions of Marys who are on the KABN system, on the KABN network. How do you do that without breaking the bank? Because that's a mass consumer acquisition model. How do you do that without having to spend millions and millions and millions of dollars to try and acquire me and 2 million other users?
Certainly, that makes a lot of sense. So let's talk about the addressable market first. So KABN's addressable market is 100% of those over the age of 13 that are online, and 13 is generally accepted as kind of the cutoff for privacy and accepting certain privacy conditions. So we talk about Gen Z. So our market is 100% of the addressable market because this is still a very, very new and fresh market.
True.
But our business model is built on what we call a feeder network. And so commercial clients that need to use our service commercially to bring in their constituents, which become customers of ours.
What's an example of a commercial client before you go further? Give us an example.
Sure.
Not that they're say your client, but what would be an example of one?
Sure, but I'll say a digital exchange. So a digital exchange needs to verify every customer in their system because some of the rules are changing. In fact, in June, the rules changed to say that anything over $1,000 in digital and transportation of digital currency will require that both parties on both ends be verified.
You're talking crypto?
Yeah, a crypto, digital. I mean, there's going to be a lot of talk about. I don't talk about crypto so much as I say digital, because transportation of digital currency might not just be banking anymore, and it may not be crypto. I think there's a lot of hybrids coming to play. Yep. So they need to verify their customers. They don't do it internally, and they don't want to store the data. So they would use us, and George would sign up with that exchange, and George would become a customer of KABN by virtue of the way the process works. So we're offloading a lot of our marketing expenses by enticing our commercial clients to work with us, and they pay a fee, and we absorb a little bit of that cost. But it's our cost of acquisition is so much less than anyone else out there.
Tiny compared to advertising, marketing, trying to acquire me.
Absolutely. So, and then we're able to pass that value back to our customers. So, and then the other side is that, it's the old adage, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time, right? So we're not going to take on the entire market at once. We're looking at particular market segments and growth opportunities and low-hanging fruit so that we can grow quickly. I'll give you an example. Revolut, one of the European banks, the neobanks, the online banks, They've got about 7 or 8 million customers. They're worth about $10 billion.
Wow.
So Monzo just came to, I believe, the U.S. They have 250,000 customers. That's 25 to $50 million in
They would
market.
be competitors, right? They're just
Yeah.
indication of fintech moving deeper and
Well,
deeper online.
I think they're somewhat hybrid competitors, but again, their cost of acquisition is so high. Ours is so much lower because we're counting on verification first. And as I said, whether it's Google cookies, whether it's millennials who are doing online services, spending more time online, where it's a shift in the new rules for exchanging or moving money, all these things, GDPR, CCPA, all these things are pointing to the fact that the online world will emulate the conventional world. And if I want to do something online, if I want to move from place to place, I'm going to have to show my passport at the border.
Yeah, and that's, again, to repeat, but it's so important repeating that. I love the fact that there are structural, legislative, market changes that are coming that are going to force users and companies like the ones you're talking about, commercial clients, to go this way. I really like that a lot, because if it was strictly just we're hoping to convince George that this is a better way to do it, that's tough to do. But I love the fact that. So let's go to competition.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, this is going to be a massive market. Just
Sure.
fraud alone, like you said, is a $30 billion. Just credit card fraud alone is $30 billion a year. Forget about all the
Look at the
rest.
ad industry. The ad industry is multiple billions of dollars a year.
Yeah, I've been reading. In fact, for everyone at home, and for you, David, but for everyone at home, I was just reading last night because I'm an Android user and I was going to download an app. I wanted to check out its safety, did some research. I ran to an article where people, development shops around the world are producing these apps that are really great, right? But they're really producing them so that they can create ads on there and somehow create click fraud and fake clicks.
Yeah.
Tens of millions of dollars. It's
Yeah.
massive that Google has to go through that's a massive market too. And you never would have thought that, but how do you guys help apps and advertisers make sure that George's click on his mobile phone is for real as opposed to a click farm?
Well, that's a little bit down the road. Before I say that, I just want to take one step backwards to something you said a couple of minutes ago. The legislation is already in place, so we're not driving towards legislation. That legislation is in place in most major regions, and we're working towards meeting the objectives of that legislation. So that's really a big piece. But in the advertising industry, we have some things on the board right now, again, to look at personal advertising engines. Same as, companies like Uber and Airbnb want to know that their users are verified. Advertisers now want to know that their users are verified.
Wow.
So we can solve a lot of those issues very, very quickly because, we're not talking about a concept here. The KABN process for verification of identity has been testing in market for over a year. So we've already got an active market. We've been using it. And there are some of our customers, our individuals, have gone to multiple places and used their KABN ID over and over again. So at the end of the day, this has been really exciting for us. We're now bringing our banking platform and value platform online, which is our primary revenue generator. So we're not coming to the market, with one hand tied behind your back. We've already got a product that works. And as I said earlier, we've got approval by Visa to issue our own debit card program in Canada and mobile banking platform.
And that speaks volumes, right? Because everybody who watches my Agoracom, these interviews, I constantly say third-party validation is so important. Because at the end of the day, David Lukacs, co-founder and president of KABN, is supposed to say great things. And so is George, so is Bob. They're all supposed to say great things. So third-party validation is critical.
Sure.
What does it mean to have Visa have approved you, to come into their network?
Well, I think it's very important. People trust, the banking brands and the Visa network. There's over 40 million merchants worldwide that accept Visa. And we're going to have a very, very unique offering based on our mobile banking wallet. But to get those approvals took us quite some time. We've been working on this probably over 20 months to get approvals. And it was a really challenging time, but we had to prove ultimately that our technology worked, and it provided a continuous validation of identity. So having the ability to work with our partners and our issuing partners and ourselves and our banks to be able to issue the Pegasus Flight Visa card, I think is a massive milestone for the company and for the Canadian investment community. Banks are among the strongest companies our Canadian banks are among the strongest in the world. So, I mean, it really bodes well for us as a fintech that we not only have a front end solution for identity verification, but we also have a revenue solution that includes our own digital banking platform and Visa card program.
Amazing overview. And we could go so much deeper, but I think ironically enough, you said something earlier, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time?
Right.
So it's almost like we've now been exposed to the Matrix and we're all Neo at home. And for the first time, we've met Morpheus and we're still trying to get our mind around it, but we get it. So that part's awesome. So let's stop there as far as describing the business and all the drivers and all that. And let's hop into the fact that you are a private company, but you intend to be on the CSC in the next 2 to 3 months. What can you tell everyone at home about that? Because that's going to give them added incentive to keep up with KABN and these interviews, because there are going to be more of these. What can you tell us about how that's looking for you guys?
Super. Well, we made a decision, last summer and worked through it through the fall to look at doing either an IPO on the CSE or an RTO. And we were fortunate enough that we were approached by a company. Unfortunately, their business wasn't performing well. They had a good shareholder base, a really good shareholder base. They had effectively no debt, and they were amenable to a deal. So we've announced that we've done a deal with Torino Power Solutions, T as in Tom, P as in Peter, S as in Samuel, on the CSE, and it's halted. And we've done it. We've already signed our definitive agreements, and we're preparing to file all our necessary paperwork. And
nice.
We're doing our RTO financing right now.
And I know this isn't 100% linear, but ballpark. I was thinking 2 to 3 months. Is it 2 to 3 months? Is it 3 to 6 months? But do you guys have a sense of that? If you don't, it's okay. But do you have a sense for what that looks like?
George, I think your estimate is fair. Ultimately, we believe that the information that we'll provide to the regulators will be excellent, and we trust our accounting team and our security lawyers and our team. This isn't the first time the management team has done a deal on the Canadian exchanges. So we've got a history here, and we understand the process, and we've got big shoulders for these issues to rest on. So at the end of the day, I think your estimate is fair, always subject to all necessary approvals and all caveats. But I think Torino has been excellent in working with us, and we're excited to be working with them. And it looks like it could be we believe it's a very excellent deal for the Canadian investment community.
David, this was great because, we've been banging the table at Agoracom that if people think the last 10 years had great technology innovation, the next 10 years is going to make the last 10 look like Stone Age, because so many things are changing, and they're changing so quickly. And some of them we have a handle on, like esports, and now what you guys doing at KABN, and some things aren't. So when people like you come on and kind of start to draw back the curtain, show everyone at home what's possible, that's awesome, because it gives us the potential to get behind a company really early. And I'll tell everyone at home, I've seen tweets when Uber went public. I've seen tweets from guys who retweeted their invitation to meet Uber for the first time back in 2012, seed round investment, and they didn't take it. And one guy said, hey, here's the invite. Here's the tweet I got back in 2012, 2013. I didn't go. And the guy said, but my friend and colleague Chris went. He put in $500,000. His firm put in $500,000, and that was worth over $1 billion at the IPO. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen with KABN, but the fact of the matter is we have ID. We have people's personal ID verification, marketing from customers, by commercial clients who want to know exactly who they're marketing to, so they're not wasting their. All that's changing.
Right.
It's getting granular. And that is going to open up opportunities for companies like KABN It's a lot harder for the existing companies, for the incumbents to get on that train because they're used to the old way. They don't want to change it. They want to hold on to those revenue streams as tight as possible for as long as it can. But really excited to hear about you guys, David. And I assure you we're going to have you back on because I'm presuming you're going to have more developments next couple months. But thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, George. It was a real pleasure.
You've been watching David Lukacs, co-founder, president at KABN North America, KABN Systems North America. And even though they're a private company, if you want more information, get to Agoracom, get to the hub, punch in KABN, KABN, and go to their profile to get a great summary overview of what the company does. And then from there, as always, we get the link to their website. Get over to the website, do a little more due diligence. Keep KABN on your radar. These are the kind of fintech companies that we love. These are the kind of situations that, behoove us to watch them closely. And then watch for more interviews with David because it's going to come fast and it's going to come furious. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Have a fantastic day. Talk to you next time.